What does it take to create something that never existed before? What does it take to challenge the status quo? What does it take to change the world? This is the Swell podcast. We're passionate about story, experience, and designing culture, but ultimately how an idea swells into a movement. Take a journey with us as we seek the answers to those three questions through the stories of thought leaders, world builders, game changers, disruptors, and other pleasantly rebellious humans who've ventured out into the unknown on a personal journey to do something novel, innovative, creative, or disruptive. In today's episode, we chat with Brendan Dawes, a UK-based artist who's exploring the aesthetics of form and code. We dive into his creative process, his installations at MoMa and Sundance, and how he elicits emotional impact and curiosity as he turns data into art. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, sign up to our newsletter at theswellpod.com, and get in on the conversation through all of the major socials at The Swell Pod. Our first season is made in partnership with Kiln. Kiln provides flex office space solutions for teams and individuals. Their all-inclusive set of amenities helps startups, creatives, and entrepreneurs alike get work done. Learn more about Kiln at kiln.co. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, Brendan. How are you?
I'm very well, Spencer. I'm here in the UK. It's very sunny at the minute, which is good. But it's lovely to see you.
Absolutely. It's been, I miss the UK. Of course, I'm in the US, and it's just great to hear your voice. And what I wanted to say is, the first time I met you, you told me a story about your mum, actually, about you explaining to her about what you do. Could you remind us what that story is, and also, what do you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I think probably all of us who work in this kind of industry, this kind of anything tech-based is always difficult to explain to a certain generation sometimes who haven't grown up with that technology. And my mum, she loves me unconditionally, etc., etc. She's even been to some of my gallery shows and stuff. She thought it was all lovely, but she still didn't really understand what I did. So I thought I would draw her a diagram because I'm a visual kind of person, right? So I drew this diagram very much. There's a very famous Charles and Ray Eames diagram that is a very similar thing, but it was kind of like a bit Venn diagram-like, and it had art and design and technology, and where they coalesced, it created this weird shape. And I said, see, Mum, what I do, I get art and design and technology, and it's about putting those things together, and it creates this like shape, and that's kind of what I do. And she looked at it and then looked at me, and then she said, oh, I told my hairdresser you invented Google Maps. So, and I just went, close enough. So, it's, and I realized, my diagram was all kind of, a bit arty type thing. And, it is, truth be told, it is always quite difficult to explain to people. And I just say, look at the work. That's what I do. I'm not really too concerned with, having a business card with my, something on it. But originally, I guess I was a designer, graphic designer. But these days, no one asks me to design anything. No one's ever comes to me and say, design a logo, design a brand or whatever. I make artwork for people, for brands, and myself. So, I've got work in the MoMA permanent collection. So I feel I can say I am an artist, even though I do have problems with that term being English and, self-deprecating and everything. It's always a bit of a difficult one. But that is, I think I've learned to embrace it now, because that is what I do.
Well, it's interesting because when I even my wife has a problem really understanding what it is that I do. Like whenever somebody asks her what I do, she's like, well, he just sits at the computer. Like that's really just what he does.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is like, if you look at your website, you know, underneath your name, it says the aesthetics of form and code.
Yeah.
And I know from my perspective, I'm still on a journey of figuring out what it is that I do. And I'm interested in like, how long was that journey for you to be able to put that line under your name of the aesthetics of form and code?
Yeah. Probably about 24 years, you know, that's the length of time I've been going, because I've always kind of changed it. And it was only in the last year that I changed it to that term, which I thought kind of sums me up really about what I do. It is, you know, I use a lot of code, but it's also about the forms that I make, and ultimately it's about beauty and aesthetics. That's why I'm doing this stuff, and that's why people come to me. So it seemed to sum it up quite well. But yeah, it's taken years to get to a place where I'm happy with it. But if I said that, if I met a relative and they asked me and I said that, they'd still be none the wiser. So let's not, you know, let's be serious here. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the nearest thing I've got to explaining what I do, or you know, how I do things at least.
Yeah. That's interesting.
What about
And
you? How do you, you know, how do you explain what you do?
well, usually it at least takes me 5 minutes to ramble on some things that I've done in the past, and eventually I get to some meaning there. But it's usually a mixture of like, well, I do this and I do this and I do this, and sometimes that means I'm solving this problem, or sometimes that means I'm solving this problem. But
Yeah.
it's very difficult, and it's interesting, I think, you know, that when you start to think about, like, I think really it's interesting when you think about what an artist does. And I think sometimes what, you know, what you might do, or when I
Yeah.
relate it to other artists, is it's the idea of communicating an emotion, or solving a problem. And oftentimes those solutions can be drastically different than what you imagine. And I think, you know, that flexibility of an artist is always probably what makes it so difficult to, you know, because you're also so interested in exploring so many different areas. And
Yeah.
I saw your talk at Pluralsight from 2018.
Yeah.
And I mean, I laughed about halfway through, like almost the entire way through that. But you mentioned something that was really interesting to me, about you data visualizers,
Yeah.
and how you have vast interest, various different
Yeah.
interests and stuff like that. And I wonder if you'd be interested in talking about, like, you know, that kind of, I guess, dynamic. Like, are you okay, like, talking with other data visualizers versus going out and exploring and being interested in various different things?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not. I know data visualizing people who are
Yeah.
amazing, and they really go deep into it. They know it as a science. That's not what I do. My
Yeah.
brain does not work like that. And it doesn't really interest me, because I'm not looking at data viz blogs. I haven't got loads of books on data viz. You know, it's not what makes me tick, and I have to recognize that. What I am interested in is, as you mentioned, you know, trying to communicate an emotion or tell a story, or, you know, and yes, sometimes data is involved in that quite a lot of times. But I'm never going to make some kind of great data viz piece that you can pore over for, you know, years. You know, it's not how my brain works, and it also doesn't interest me. So yeah, I don't really have any dealings with the data viz community, even though I've been in lots of books and won awards for that kind of stuff. Fine, but it's not my, you know, it just doesn't it doesn't float my boat. Yeah, I'm interested in film and narrative, and composition. Those are things that make me excited, make my heart beat a bit faster. You know, I just don't look at other data viz, you know.
Yeah. Well, the emotion thing is interesting, because I Spencer shared with me that you've had people look at your work and start crying. Is that true?
Yeah, no, when I've shown like the art of cybersecurity thing at big conferences, like there was one at the Barbican in London last October, and some of the comments was like, they said they had an emotional response to it. Like they said, I had goosebumps. Or some people were like almost brought to tears. And I'm thinking, it's data. It's like, which is crazy, right? So, but I think to me that's a lesson in, doesn't matter, doesn't matter what it is. If you do it in the right way, it can communicate something emotionally, and that piece is, combined with the music, the graphics, the way it flows. There's something touches you about it. I can't tell you what that is. I didn't press a certain button and go, all right, add the humanness now. It doesn't. This is just how I make stuff. So, but I think often in work it's that kind of X factor that you're looking for. I think Hendrix described, it's not about playing the notes, it's about the spaces in between. That is what anyone can learn how to play notes, but it's the gaps you leave in between that make it emotional. And so I'm trying to find those gaps in between the data, and and hopefully that manifests in the work to get that kind of reaction from people. Yeah.
Well, so I was looking at your website, and one of the first pieces that I looked at was one of the commissions from Trend Micro, which was specifically one about it was of course a representation of the threats and a representation of the system around it, and then the creativity that flowed out from that, or because it was protected by that system. And that, I know that's what I felt, at least. And when I thought about, it's interesting because you mentioned like the notes and the space in between. I think a lot of times, you have your objective truth, which is the data and the fact. And what's so interesting about what I got from that was this overwhelming feeling of safety to be creative, to be creatively curious. And that's so powerful. And it was a singular message rather than again, as you mentioned, all those individual notes. You created like a harmony with that piece, and it was really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that was key with that work, was breaking it down into those three components. I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Remember, kids, don't sneeze into your hands like I just did. Right. So, yeah, but I think I've got a bit of hay fever today. Well, yeah, the system, the threats, and the creativity was the core things, So, because ultimately, like you said, Josh, it was like, why are we even doing this stuff? Why are we putting our systems and protecting them? It's so we can be creative.
Do you think that's the root of a lot of the work? If there was a theme across a lot of the work that you do, is an emotional explanation of the why some certain things exist or certain things happen? Would you say that's true?
I think so, in quite a lot of it. Yeah, I would imagine. I think I like though too. There's the difference between design and art, right?
Yeah.
Design is about answers, and art is about questions.
Yeah.
And art for me is about leaving people with questions. I'm not here to give people answers. Someone described it once to me as the difference between Spielberg, who I love, and Kubrick. If you watch a Kubrick movie, there's just loads of questions at the end, where Spielberg kind of wraps it up, and and I think it was an important difference. So that's what interests me, the questions. I'm not here to give people answers. Where I am trying to, obviously I'm trying to communicate a narrative or a story, great. But I also want it to, if I can leave people with some more questions, then great.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions, Spencer, but I think that there's a really interesting transition to your work that was in MoMA, right? And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, like as far as what was the reception from that, because so just a little bit of context. It was Vertigo, is that right? Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Yeah.
And you can even explain it if you want. Because I thought, I looked at that and I studied film specifically in college, and I saw that and I was like, my initial reaction was I loved seeing the transition from different colors, where it was fading into certain colors and fading out to certain colors. But then at certain points, there was a really harsh juxtaposition between a darkness and a lightness. And there were some really interesting things and moments within that. But I don't know. Yeah. Would you mind just talking about that piece?
So I did that in I think it was 2004, and it was just a self-initiated, thing. And so it samples a frame every second, and each row is 1 minute of film time, and it does the entire film. And they're like little thumbnails, as you've seen, right? And it does that for the entire film. So you're left with the sheet of images that is the film, and you can see the color changes and that kind of stuff. So with verticos, it's interesting because there's a red section and a green section, and you can really see that when you see it, you stand back from it. Yeah, and it's one of those things. That was just part of an iterative process where I was playing around at the time with. At the time, it wasn't even MPEGs; it was DVD footage that I was, hooked up to the computer, and I was bringing these frames in. What can I do with them? And this thing I called Cinema Redux was one of the things at the end. So yeah, that's why it is what it is. And I did that in 2004, and I put it on the internet. Internet being this amazing thing, people started to pick up on it. I think The Guardian wrote about it like probably a year later, something. And then midway through 2007, I get an email, and it's from MoMA, and saying that they're putting this exhibition on in 2008. I think they've been closed for a while, so this was one of the first major exhibitions for the opening. It's called Design in the Elastic Mind. And they wanted me to, could they feature the work? And I think originally they were going to do like 2 A2 size prints. Still would have been amazing. In the end, they did it 30 feet wide, high. So it's like an entire wall. Me and my wife went out to New York and went to the opening party. There was that many people there, you just couldn't get near the work. It was like, there's like 3,000 people at the opening. There was lots of amazing exhibitions and work. And for me, someone who, I failed art at school. I have 0 qualifications. So to be in MoMA, and then what happened after I got back a few months later, after the exhibition had finished, they then wrote to me and said, we'd like it in the permanent collection. And so you just gift it to them, and it's been in 3 exhibitions since then. And then it was in this other thing called Big Bang Data, which was nothing to do with MoMA, but that was in 13 cities across the world. So I've got to confess, that code took me about an hour on a Saturday afternoon. So, and it's one of those things, it's not about the complexity of the code, it's about what it is.
Yeah.
No one cares about how complex it is or how simple it is. And it's really simple, but no one had really done that before. So, yeah.
Well, you hear stories of like really popular songs being created in 15 minutes, right? So an hour or 10,000 hours, the work stands up.
Well, I think I saw an interview with Sting once, from the Police, and he said, I wrote Every Breath You Take in half an hour when he was in the Caribbean or something. And he said, yeah, it paid for my house. That's quite good.
I'm interested. 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that story about just not your art lesson, right? And your art teacher. I'm interested. Did you invite him to the exhibition?
No, because it was years later and I'd lost touch. And to be honest, I wanted to ring them up and laugh down the phone, but no, no, it would have been cool if I'd had I had that kind of relationship. But I didn't go to college or anything, so this was just at high school, right? So I didn't really know the teacher that well, or so I lost touch once I left school.
Yeah, I love that. What questions did that particular piece kind of, do you think, triggered in people's minds? I mean, Josh, you mentioned, I'm interested also what you thought, Josh, but yeah, Brendan.
I know when John Walters wrote about it, he was the editor of I, but he was writing for The Guardian at the time. And he said that film students would be able to postulate new ideas about film. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, and obviously I'm not thinking of that when I'm doing it, you know, and I'm creating the work. I just thought it was kind of cool, right? But that's what I love. You put the work out there and people bring their own ideas into it, or new theories, and that's what I love. That you create this system, but then people can then play around with it. So
Yeah.
for me, yeah, it was just the fact that people could view it in different ways, especially when it's really large. They view it from afar and it's one thing, because you're seeing it as a giant compilation. But then, and you think, oh, what's that? And then you get really close. And I've got pictures of people doing this, by the way. And they're like looking at each individual frame, and then they realize, oh, wow, this is a film, you know, and then they recognize the film. So I like this idea of layers for work. You know, you can view it in one way, you can view it in another, depends how close you are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love the fact that it's the unknown, something that inspired you, but also people don't know necessarily what they're going to find until they, you know, see it from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I can sense that I mean, you know what you love and what you don't, right? To the point that you talked about earlier. Where did it all begin? Like you're in your art lesson, and then now you're in this incredible place, and you know, looking at your work. Like, at what point did you start to discover that this is your path?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I ever let it didn't go to my head. Obviously on a CV, it's like a major deal. But I was just moving on to the next thing. You know, I probably could have made a whole career just making loads of them, you know, that would be it, you know. But that didn't really interest me. I wanted to do new things. So, yeah, it gave me some kind of validation, because the whole, you know, imposter syndrome thing, you know, it's still, you know, I'm still dealing with that. But I just didn't get complacent about it. It was obviously an amazing time to go out there and see it, and then, you know, all the other exhibitions it was in. So yeah, it was just something I kind of went, okay, that was nice.
Yeah.
You know, what's next?
And just take me back for a moment though. So what I mean, this was your, you know, at some point you said you were doing kind of graphic artist, and you were doing things like that. At what point were you starting to want to look at data and turn that into art?
Well, you could argue that Cinema Redux is data, because I haven't even interpreted the data. It's data at the rawest form. I think someone wrote a thesis about that particular thing, that was quite unusual in that way. I can't remember that I did a big piece for EE, which used like 6 million data points, and that was hugely successful as a campaign for them. They're a big mobile, you know, comms company, mobile phone company over here. So yeah, I guess it was that. I never really made the conscious decision to go, I'm going to be a data person now. To me, it was just a material. It was just another material to work with. That's what data was to me, and continues to be. And to me, it was all digital bits and, you know, ones and zeros. So I just saw it like that.
Yeah, love it. Josh, I'm sure you've got lots of other questions, but let me just ask you what, I kind of want to understand, what's your favorite project that you've worked on, right? Your favorite piece of work, and kind of why. But I'm kind of also trying to understand why it means so much to you, the work you do, because I love the work, and I can tell that you absolutely, it means a lot.
There was one with Airbnb, which you might have seen, which was a physical, you know, so let's, you know, talk about some of the other stuff I do, but a physical installation. It was done quite quickly. That was at the Sundance Film Festival. But again, that came off the back of some work I'd done myself. I did this little machine that was called the Happiness Machine, and I made it just for me as an experiment. and you press the button and it went out on the internet, and it found people who were talking about being happy, and it printed a receipt of that person and what they said. And that just caught fire on the internet. That was just crazy. And then a few years later, Airbnb had seen it, and they were doing an installation at the Sundance Film Festival. And they came to me and said, look, it's all about neighborhood, our installation. Can we use your happiness machine? I said, well, how about something else? Why don't I make something for you? So I ended up making 12 printers. They were hung from the ceiling. People could text message in stories about their neighborhood, and then people could print them out, and everyone then pinned them up. I think there's pictures on my website showing, I think there's 5,000 stories that were shared in a week. And you had to be there. It wasn't on the internet. You had to be physically there. So you had this jungle of receipt papers with these stories on. And the amazing thing, Spencer, was that the stories were brilliant. They weren't like, go try the coffee down the road. You know, that's what I would put. These were like amazing stories. So again, I'm always surprised by what people do, you know, and this kind of, you give them something and they just run with it and take it and they surprise you. It taught me that, you know, not to prejudge people.
So it's interesting. If I was to relate it back to my experience, like there's stuff that I do for work, and then there's stuff that I do for myself.
Yeah.
And I look at the stuff that I do for myself as just as important. It's where I explore certain things. And so you mentioned the happiness project being, at least at the beginning of it, was something that you were exploring for yourself. And what was it what was it that was interesting to you that sent you off on this journey? You know, what was that inspiration? But also kind of, you know, there's that 4-part process that you talked to, and maybe you can kind of take us from that moment of really chaotic mess and inspiration, you know, and the flow of ideas all the way kind of through that entire process.
Well, I think with I get the way I view kind of my personal stuff is that's the way I get work. So I put these little things out there that hopefully attracts people and go, ooh, that's quite interesting and nice. So I have that in the back of my mind as well. The happiness machine came about because at the time, and I think obviously it's even worse now, is people easily forget that the person on the other side of that Twitter handle is a human being. And so I wanted to make a machine that printed out these like moments. And then when you hold things in your hand, like a physical tactile thing, I think it makes it somehow a bit more important, or has a bit more gravitas than, you know, holding a screen or whatever. And you know, as you're scrolling through. So that was part of the reason for making it. As for the process, with that one, it's one thing when you, as you know, when you're doing a personal project, you know, it's not mission critical in that the client is it has to be so bulletproof. You know, you might have it if in this case, I had it at home, no one was going to bash into it. No, you know, it's all those kind of things, right? Didn't have to worry about it. What happens if it fails? You know, it doesn't, who cares? When a client gets involved, obviously, those things have to be sorted. So the technical challenges with that one, and again, well, I like to do things I don't know how to do because I think it's a bit more interesting. So I'd never done text message anything before. I'd never used a text message backend or anything. I told the client that I could do it, you know, and then it was like, you know, as you do, like, okay, we've got to figure this out now. But I knew there were systems out there. That's the beauty of the internet, isn't it? And you can find all this stuff out. And it turns out it's really, really easy to do text message stuff. So I figured, you know, researched that, found out how to do that, then had to build a back end that they could administer the stories. Originally, they were going to approve them, but in the end, they just let everything come through live, which is very brave of them. But as I said, all the stories were really good. So there was that. And then how do you make, you know, the logistics sometimes, like, okay, I made one printer, now I've got to make 12. There's just me, there's no one else here. Don't even have any pets. So, you know, it's like, you know, there's my wife who like will help me, any kind of wiring stuff. I was trying to figure out with that one, we were trying to figure out how to, because I wanted the cables to be beautiful textile. In fact, I've got some here. You know, this is like, you know, beautiful cable. You don't want a horrible plastic cable connecting this machine. It just ruins it, right? All the details, you know, I love all those details. So, you know, we spent one night, how do we get the textile cable in that cable? How do we solder it? Because it was quite hard. So we figured that out. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. And then you realize each printer took a day to 3D print, and there's 12 of them. And you're like, okay, did not factor that into the budget. And but managed to meet the deadline. But because you've got to do it, you can't just hold your hands up and go, oh, sorry, you know, screwed up. And I was already using a very good system to connect to the Wi-Fi, which was a very high-end. You could connect 1 million objects and it would still work. So and I'd used that right from the beginning, so that was all good. So yeah, and then it was a case of, you know, going to Utah, Salt Lake City, and just outside there where Sundance is. There's no dancing and there's no sun, by the way.
Sometimes there's a little.
There is dancing, yeah. But there is, yeah. But it's snowy. It's snowy and cold. It is not Hollywood, right? So
yeah.
And I had really no idea what I was going into. So yeah, and then you work with the team to rig it all and everything, and thankfully it worked. You know, it was pretty solid, but it's actually quite simple on the back end. But nothing failed, you know, because I wasn't there the whole week. I was only there for a few days. So after that, it was like, okay, if this fails, then I'm going to have to talk them through it. So yeah, there's all those things. When a client becomes involved, it ramps up the seriousness, you know. And also, don't forget, it's a brand, you know, and it would make them look bad if this thing failed, you know.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because if you go back to, so there were a couple things, you know, it's obvious, it's something that you were, you know, looking to learn. It was something that you'd never done before, and I think, you know, the idea of, at least behind it, right? You know, that we're not connected enough to maybe the other person or the other story that you might see on Twitter, right? And that's a powerful thing, and I think it resonates with a lot of people. And it's interesting to think about like how it caught fire, you know. And do you think that that's an important, a few of those elements are important to the idea that it caught fire? Things like, you know, at first, so you were trying to do something that you'd never done before.
Yeah.
But also I think the idea of you weren't afraid of failing, which is interesting, right? Because at the time it was just a personal project. But there's also something to that too, that you and your wife, which I would love to know more about that as well. Like I can imagine like being up late at night, like hooking wires into it. And like, that's fascinating. And do you look at that as like, you know, that is kind of what requires, or when you compare that to how it caught fire and how it became successful, do you see those things kind of, you know, it's kind of, you have to kind of cultivate that environment, I guess, around you, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe people see, well, let's put it this way. Sometimes, have you ever found this, where you have a project and midway through the project is like, you're like, this is awesome. This is, it just looks great. And then it goes on and more people get involved, and the end product, the client's happy, and you go, no, it was the sweet spot was in the middle. And I haven't had this really over the last few years. Everything's been cool, but I have had those occasions where more people have got involved, and, you know, they're worrying, maybe they're thinking about it almost too much. It's like, oh, what's someone in marketing has just said maybe we shouldn't use blue, or, you know, I don't know what it is, right? So there's that. I think when you're a very small team of one and my occasional wife, you know, for sanity check, you know, it allows you to be very focused on the original idea, because even with the Airbnb thing, they just let me do it. They didn't influence me at all. Interestingly, I did it again for the same agency in New York, and it was terrible. They kind of ruined it because they took out some of them. They didn't want a button anymore. They just wanted it to come out timed. And I said, you've lost the gift. The gift is you press something, you get a reward. Oh, we don't care about that. So, you know, those kind of like frustrating conversations, and you try and explain this is interaction, you know, no, just we don't want a button. Okay, fine. So yeah, I think it's much better if you can have a small team, you know, to just focus. I know even at iPhone, you know, Apple, I think Johnny Ive's team is small, you know, which is, you know, crazy when you think about it. So yeah, I think that's kind of key. And also I think you can see in the work, I really wanted to make it. I wasn't being asked to make it originally. It was just something I wanted to do because I wanted it. I thought it deserved to be in the world. And that's, you know, that's why I made it originally. And I think that's why it resonated with people was, God, this is something very emotional and very human. It's like I did a project for a MailChimp, and I made 6 objects, physical objects that reinterpreted our relationship with email. And again, that just was like people really took to all of them. But the one they really loved was the simplest one. And it was I said, why can't you have a light switch for your email? And it's on the wall, and you come home and you go, I'm done with email for the day, switch it off. And everyone was like, oh my God, why do we not have this, right? So, and still no one's really made it. And people keep saying, are you going to make that? And it's like, oh, it's complicated. Yeah. To roll things out at that level is hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a simple idea. That's all it was. And it was just, people were like, it just resonated with people.
It's simple. Oh, sorry, Josh. It's simple, but it's just different. And I think, you know, you raise a few things there, like the importance of, you know, we say collaboration is essential, but actually the autonomy of a kind of an entrepreneurial startup is that's what really is important sometimes. So you can follow some of those instincts that you clearly have, but the just doing things different make people think differently. I love that. Sorry, Josh, go for it.
No, I love that too. I was just gonna say, so for anybody that potentially listens to this, right, like definitely go and check out the Happiness Project, because for me, what was so interesting, and I hope you don't mind if I share this, but when I see that it's this printer is small or it looks small, at least from what I've seen, and to me it feels like it's so interesting. I imagine, or at least an image of a heart is placed in my mind when I see that. Right. And the fact that you have, like, it's interesting that they asked you to take out that button, because to me, like it's just this overwhelming feeling of a heart too. And so like the idea of having to touch that heart to connect with somebody was so passionate, or so it flooded into me. It was so strong, I guess. Yeah.
Well, as you can see, well, you know, you take that on board and you can see why I was so frustrated in the second time it was done, that they said, take that button away, even though I argued it in a very nice way. You know, they still wasn't having it. But the other thing, Josh, to say as well is people had done thermal printer things before, internet connected printers. They'd done it before I did it. And it was interesting when I did the first prototype of that, it was at the London Design Festival before I'd had really the success of it. And the guy came up to me and said, but what you've done is really easy. He couldn't equate, why are you even here? Like, what, you know, he was like saying, well, I could have done that. You know, it's like, yeah, but it's it's not the technology, it's not the printer, it's what it is. And I think sometimes we, as people who use technology, concentrate too much on the technology. You know, what is the story? What are we trying to communicate? How is it going to resonate? No one cares that it's an internet connected printer. Who cares? The other thing as well, you say about the smallness of it, and it's a really good point that I didn't mention before. if I had done it as an A4 sheet of paper on a normal printer, it would not be as good, because it's not intimate. You know, if I, you know, I've got an envelope here, small, but that is says something completely different to a bigger envelope, for instance. So all these things come into play. The form factor of it is, it's tiny. So it says this is a bit more special. An A4 piece of paper ain't gonna cut it. You know, I've just made a fax machine. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask one more question then, I guess, because I think you touched on a really important theme of, you know, that I think a lot of artists or a lot of designers, even entrepreneurs, I think this idea of simplification is a really important one. That story that you shared, right? Well, this is really simple. Like, why are you here? I guess, I mean, I'm not sure that really a lot of people outside of that community understand that, you know, I think a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation is, in fact, I think almost to a T, the process that you talk about, like this idea of getting too simple, this idea of getting to maybe that's meaning, but you know, and a lot of that is the really hard decisions that you have to make of not including certain things, you know, to be very specific and targeted. I think whether that's towards an emotion or towards a message or a theme, or I don't know. It's a really interesting thing, because I've noticed that time and time again that, you know, I mean, the easiest representation of that a lot of people will probably resonate with is the idea of a deck, or a PowerPoint presentation. If I go all the way back into business, right, is I think generally a lot of times people tend to fill up presentations and decks with countless amounts of data, countless amounts of slides and information. And really, you know, you pull a designer in and they're probably going to take out 95% of that stuff and really say, what are you really trying to say with this? Because you probably only need this, and this. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that famous adage, isn't there? You know, when a design is complete, when there's nothing, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember Steve McQueen apparently was famous, the actor Steve McQueen, not the director. Steve McQueen was famous for, he would strip about 50% of the script away, because he could just communicate something with a look, or he didn't even need to speak, that guy. So I kind of like that idea that, you know, what can I remove, and still have it communicate, you know. And I think most good design is that. So I always try and practice that. And again, if I look at the projects that didn't work as well, thankfully I've not had that many, but there was one a few years ago, and it was an AR thing, and the game was so complicated. And sure enough, when it came to being used on the day at a big air show, people were like, well, this is quite complicated. I was like, yep. I did say, you know, you just want it, but of course the salespeople are like, no, but we need this message and we need this message. And I'm like, these are just people turning up at your stand. They've got 30 seconds. They haven't got the, you know, hey, what, you know, but sometimes it's half the battle to trying to communicate that to the client, that, you know, we should just distill it down to this beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, what do you learn? What have you learned around that then? Because, you know, some people maybe will never just never get it, right? And I think even if you're talking about the decks in the corporate world, Josh, you know, if you're trying to bring in emotion or importance of design, or to focus on the why, people sometimes just don't get it. They maybe they're blinkered and they're used to what they used to, or they just can't see the vision in the mind's eye. How have you? Do you just stay clear of those types of people, those types of, you know, clients, or and how have you, you know, kind of influenced that to make sure it is still very simple and effective?
Well, the problem is that when you get a new client, you don't really know until you start working with them, you know. I mean, sometimes you get an intuition, like, you know, Trend Micro are absolutely amazing, because they just let me do my stuff. They give me a brief, and they maybe have some guiding words, or, you know, whatever, and what they're trying to communicate, but they have confidence in me, and I think it's a two-way thing. You have to have confidence in the client as well to understand creativity and art and design, so there's a lot on them as well. But on the other hand, they know the business that, that or what this particular campaign is and what they're trying to get out of it. That's really important as well. So there is compromise, I think, sometimes on both sides. There is, sometimes there are clients that just refuse to even see a different point of view, and really they should be just hiring someone to just push a mouse around. Don't speak to me or people like me, because you're wasting your money. Just get someone to just do what, they can just dictate what it is and fine. But yeah, luckily I've managed to avoid that kind of stuff. I think hopefully I do kind of try and get a sense when we first meet, that there's a meeting of minds, I think.
I love that. It makes me think of, there's a lot of focus in the industries right now around obviously agility and making sure we understand what the outcome is of what we're doing, outcome and the why. But there's a lot of focus on the measurement, right? What is your hypothesis, and how are you going to measure it in the short term and long term? And this type of work is often, you can't really account for that. It's difficult to measure the emotion that people feel and how they remember it for maybe many years, and how they feel toward even the brand or the product. I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that. Part of me wants to ask you, what was the hypothesis for the project you've just talked about, and how was it measured, and how is it still out there today? Is it still in people's memories? Have they archived it at Airbnb? As a part of their history? I don't know.
With that one, I guess there's an amazing picture of the art director from Airbnb, and he's stood in the middle of all the stories, and he just looks very happy, because the thing with those kind of installations is they're very transient. It's that in that case it was a week, but it was a very important week for them. And it was successful because I looked at the tweets and the Instagrams, and people were saying things. I think there's some on my website that quotes them, but there's one like, "This is how you tell a story," and there was lots of things like that. And even the Sundance Film Festival tweeted about it. They didn't tweet about everything, but they picked up on it to say this was like this amazing installation. So that on those, there isn't any kind of, qualitative data that, suggests all these people saw it and then got loads of Airbnbs. You're never going to have that with that kind of stuff. So it is an emotional, anecdotal thing. But that was my job. It wasn't to create any kind of ROI. It was about an experiential thing. Yeah. And as long as it's successful for that week, they did, I gave them all the stories, and they're probably sitting on someone's hard drive in, they could have made a book out of them or something, or exhibited them somewhere else. That's still an option, I think. But obviously they're a massive company and they've got a million things going on. Yeah. So yeah, but for that time, it was, really successful for them.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I can imagine that it actually did have a longer lasting impact than I think anyone realizes. The work that we do is really focused on looking at touch points along a journey. So, this one being such an important one in a journey, right? It's a touch point that happened, and I think there's several things that the business maybe has done or maybe could do to really continue that message and the emotion, to strengthen either their culture inside the company, but also the brand feeling or sentiment toward it. So anyhow, I think, I don't know, Josh, do you have any, where I'm going with that? I'm kind of just trying to think, how does that connect back to having these these incredibly visual and emotional touch points with other things. I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just I know from my end, I think the question that I'm constantly going back to is, I think what you were talking about is, you know, how do you prove the value of an emotional experience? And it's an interesting question, because yes, I think it comes back to even the idea of looking at data versus telling the story of data in a very interesting way. Like, for instance, you know, I can look at data, I can look at the spreadsheet of the numbers, or maybe somebody could put together an infographic on that data, or I can watch your installation, your piece about how the system protects the creativity, you know, and I can look at it in various different ways, and I can argue that maybe each has, of course, their own value, but it's a question of, like, there is, I think, more important value than I think people realize right now in what you do, you know, especially within the workplace. Like, a lot of what you've done is external, and marketing for businesses and for clients, but I think especially when you start to talk about culture, and talk about what it's like to what it feels like to work at a company, you know, it's interesting to think about how do you continue to prove that value of those things inside of businesses for your cultures. And you know, and I go back to art and culture and the importance of the, you know, one to the other. And but I don't know, it's an interesting question that I know Spencer and I are both going back and forth on.
Yeah, it's well, I just think culture and art and everything is, I always say, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're a hard-headed accountant, you know, they still go home and watch, you know, a film, or you know, or they go and see some art or whatever it is. They're not robots, these people.
Yeah.
So that it's an important thing to remember, that everyone, they are human beings. Okay, you can have the odd person who's like, doesn't like music, for instance, at all, you know, those kind of things, but you know, they're quite rare. So you know, that's what I'm tapping into, is that shared universality of, you know, a story, or you know, actually being passionate about something. You know, I think it's in all of us, and that's what I'm trying to tap into, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think so. We're hitting, I think, the end of the session. I know that you know, obviously I'm sure you're interested about a lot of things, and I know you shared with us, you know, something that not a lot of people know about you. I don't know, Spencer, do you want to share that real quick?
Yeah, I think you said that you, I mean, so I'm from the UK clearly, and I used to go to some good raves in the 90s as well. But did you play Cream? And did you have a record deal or something? Tell us about it.
Well, I guess it's a similar, you know, kind of ethos to what I do now, really. I was working in a factory at the time. I was about to get married, but I'd managed to save up and bought myself a sampler, and so this is like the very early 90s, and I started to, you know, make some music. I'm not a musician, but I can, you know, put things together with sequences and things. Again, you know, a computer making things, I guess, is what I'm into. And so I made this little demo cassette, and there was a record label a record shop in Liverpool, just down the road from me, called 3 Beats. And I knew that they started their own record label as well. So I went in there one Saturday and just, you know, looking through the records, and then I said, "Oh, could you have a listen to this cassette sometime?" You know, and he took it and said, "Yeah, sure." You know, I'm thinking I'm never going to hear from them again. And then I think in the next week, I'd come home from work, and there was a message to say they'd like to talk to me about putting, you know, some records out. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is the big time, you know. It's all these thoughts, and of course, you know, and so we did a couple of 12-inch singles. I think I've still got a couple here, actually. And then I played various clubs. But of course, again, I'm on my own, right? So, and I'm going to play Cream. And you know, of course, it's all fake. You know, the music's, all on tape and you're just pretending to play something. So I thought, well, I'm going to look a bit stupid just on my own on the stage. So I rang my brother up and I said, my brother is younger than me and he was massively into the rave scene. Like every drug he could take, he would take, right? So he was hugely into it. And I said, listen, do you want to, and he was going to these places as well. He said, do you want to come on stage with me and like play Cream and just pretend to play the keyboard? And he goes, yeah. So, we did that. And I didn't see him the rest of the night. He just disappeared, after the PA, it was like he was gone. God knows what he was doing. But weirdly enough, and this is a little, epilogue to that, my brother is now a very successful drugs counselor. So
Wow.
I'll let you figure out the gaps, right? So anyway, so yeah, and so I think we released some stuff in America, and I remember seeing it in Mix magazine, and they had a chart of New York club hits, and mine was like number 3, and I was like, oh my God, but hardly, I think I made about £400 out of it. Did a couple of singles. They had actually a big hit with another couple of guys called Oceanic. And that was like I think it was almost number 1 here. And they actually live in the same town as me. So they put all the money into, them at the time, where I was like this weird kind of, just making these weird records. But yeah, so it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
That's brilliant. I love that story. You're going to have to send me the recording.
Yeah, I will. I think I've got some MP3s somewhere.
Brilliant. We'll have to make that available for our listeners. In fact, one of our future guests is DJ Dawes that played at Pluralsight Live. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we're going to be interested just to listen to how he mashes that music up, right, and reads the audience, and there's lots of things we're looking forward to chatting to him about. So I think thank you for today. I've got probably just a couple of last questions that relate to the future for you and the work that you're doing. Let me just go back though on something you said. I love the fact that you called your wife an occasional wife, which is brilliant. I would love to read the stories that she sent you via that printer, by the way. And maybe that is a great way to communicate, possibly with my wife or my teenagers, to install it. So I want to know where I can buy one. And install it. It'd be an awesome product to have. But no, I think I'm interested to know what you're doing, in the future. What's not just projects you might be doing, but where are your interests right now? Where we might see something in a couple of years as you develop it.
Well, there's one thing in the very near future. There's something coming out in December. I can't say what it is, but it's probably in my 24-year career is one of the best things I've ever done. It's a print thing, and it involves 100,000 unique images that I made for it, all generative, all coded. You will know the products probably when you see it, but other than that, I can't really say. But it's a friend of mine who runs this thing. Very successfully. I've known him for 20 years. So that thing, I can't wait to see that out in the world, and that's going to be December the 1st, that's announced. And then I'm actually on with some Trend Micro stuff right now for a 4th commission from them. So things are rendering at the moment for that. But otherwise, generally, I've got into the world of crypto art. So, art sold on the blockchain. And I got into it in July after some people I know who run one of the platforms in the UK, actually. And they've been on at me for years to join it. And I was like, I don't know. And so I finally did it. And one of the world's biggest collectors of crypto art is called Whale Shark. No one knows who he is. It is a man because I've heard his interviews, but he snapped it up in an hour, the first piece I did. And he's then gone on to collect pretty much all my work. And they're paying, it's good money. So that's a kind of focus for me now. I've got some, there's then these other platforms like there's one called Nifty Gateway, which is a crypto art platform, and they do drops every month with different artists. So I'm doing mine on the 26th of November. You have to be invited to do it. There was a friend of mine, well, he's not a friend, but he's a super famous motion designer. And he did his first debut a few weeks ago. And he had 2 pieces, and they went for 66,000 each. Wow. Now these are just digital files. You don't get a print. You get a digital file, and you can put it in your virtual gallery and that kind of thing. So it's crazy and amazing. And, so that's kind of alongside my client stuff, that's kind of like now the stuff that I can make personally, I can actually sell as well. Because I used to sell prints and stuff, but logistically it's hard, and there's not really much money in it. This one is really interesting. So yeah, that's kind of a key focus for me, along with learning, AI and those kind of things, bringing that into my work. So yeah, it's all new things I haven't really done before, but it's all exciting.
That's brilliant. It's been a pleasure to meet with you. Thank you so much for kind of spending your morning with us, just sharing and the insights. We really loved it.
Well, thank you, and thanks Spencer. Thank you, Josh, both of you for the brilliant questions, and it's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, it has. Real quick, Brendan. Yeah, it was amazing. If people want to learn more about you or find out more about you, or even, I don't know, maybe buy your art on the blockchain. I don't know. How can they do that?
So BrendanDawes.com is my website. Brendan Dawes, all one word, Twitter, Instagram. If you want to see my crypto art stuff, though I don't really call it crypto art, because to me, that's pictures of Bitcoin icons and stuff. I'm not really into that. But if you go to makersplace.com, that's where and Known Origin is another one. So there's 2 of the main platforms that I'm on currently. You can see my work. I think most of it's sold out. There is a couple of things left. I've not done any new stuff until this drop on the 26th of November. I wanted to just try and concentrate on it. So I haven't released anything for about 4 weeks. But yeah, so they're the main places. Well, BrendanDawes.com is my website, and pretty much everything's on there, and you can jump off from there and fall into a coma if you so wish. So
fantastic.
Feeling sleepy, that'll definitely put you to sleep.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Swell podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, sign up to our newsletter at theswellpod.com, and get in on the conversation through all major socials at the Swell Pod. We'll see you next time.